Cowboy saves two Apache girls. Next day, their mother arrives with strange reward. Under a pale winter sun, the plains lie breathless. One man rides alone, Luke Mercer, a cowboy more home with silence and company, until a cry shatters the stillness. Two small Apache girls, cornered by hunger and a starving wolf. The shot that saves them will bind his fate to theirs, turning one quiet morning into the start of something neither mercy nor chance can explain. The light that morning had a color all its own, thin gold brushed with frost. The land looked like it had been carved from glass, every blade of grass silvered, every sound held in the still throat of the world. Luke Mercer rode slow, letting his horse pick its way through the frozen scrub. The leather of his saddle creaked in rhythm with the wind. He liked it that way. Quiet, empty, the kind of silence that made a man hear his own soul, even if he didn't much like the tune. The mountains were a pale shadow to the west, their peaks wearing smoke-colored crowns. Luke's breath plumed in front of him, and somewhere above, a hawk traced circles in the sky. Then he heard it, a cry, sharp, high, carried thin over the plain. He reined in, head lifting, every muscle listening. For a moment, he thought it might be wind whistling through dead grass. But then it came again, softer this time, broken, human. His heart jerked once. He was off the horse before he thought about it, boots breaking through the crust of frost. Rifle in hand, he followed the sound toward a patch of cedar and mesquite. There, between the brush and a flat rock split by years of weather, he saw them. Two little girls huddled tight together, wrapped in torn deerskin, eyes wide as winter moons. And not 10 feet from them, a lean gray wolf crouched, ribs sharp beneath its hide, hunger burning in its eyes. Luke didn't call out, didn't dare. The older girl, maybe 6, had her arms thrown around the smaller one, her own small body a shield. The wolf's tail flicked once, breath steaming. He raised his rifle slow, steady as prayer. The wolf turned its head, lips curling back to show teeth yellowed by age. One step forward, silent as smoke. The gunshot cracked through the morning, a sound too loud for that quiet world. Snow leapt, and the animal dropped, its breath fogging once before it stilled. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the older girl's chin lifted. Her gaze met his. Not fear, not yet trust either. Just watchfulness, sharp as any blade. Luke lowered the rifle, set aside and crouched, making himself small. "You're all right now," he said, voice low, calm, the way a man talks to a skittish colt. They didn't answer, but they didn't run either. He unhooked his canteen, unscrewed the cap, and held it out. The older girl hesitated before taking it, her fingers trembling. She handed it to the younger one first. The little one drank fast, water spilling down her chin. Then she passed it back, shy eyes darting toward him. Up close, Luke could see the raw cracks in their lips, the bruises of cold on their hands. Thin, starved maybe, he shrugged off his coat and draped it around both of them. The older girl pulled it close, her shoulders squaring like she was daring him to try and take it back. Luke felt something shift in his chest, an ache that was old, half forgotten, but never gone. The wind turned colder. He glanced toward the west, where smoke from his cabin would be rising faint and crooked. "Come on," he said softly, gesturing. "There's warmth yonder." They didn't understand the words, but something in his tone carried enough. The smaller girl reached for his sleeve, her tiny fingers clutching tight. Luke started walking, letting them follow. The older one stayed half a step behind, eyes sharp, scanning the brush. Brave little thing, he thought, brave and scared and still standing. Their footprints pressed dark into the frost. 3 sets of tracks, winding toward the small rise where his cabin sat. By the time they reached it, the day had lost its color. The sun was a pale coin sinking behind the hills. Smoke curled from the chimney, blue against gray sky. Luke pushed the door open. The heat from the fire met the cold like two enemies wrestling. Inside smelled of coffee grounds with ash and the faint salt of dry beans. He guided them to the hearth. The girls crouched close, hands spread to the flames, faces lit with wonder and wariness both. Their dark eyes flicked from the fire to him, to the single room, to the rifle leaning against the wall. Every sound, the crackle of wood, the groan of the logs, made them stiffen, then ease again. He poured coffee for himself and ladled warm beans into 2 small bowls. The older girl took hers quick, head down, eating fast and silent. The younger ate slow, careful, glancing at him between bites as though measuring his worth. He didn't speak, just sat near the fire, boots out, letting the warmth soak through the day's cold. Outside, snow began to fall again, thin flakes drifting like ash, settling on the rail fence and the empty corral. The cabin's walls groaned softly, and for the first time in months, Luke didn't hear only his own breathing in that room. He tried not to think of the empty chair across from him, the one where his wife used to sit with her knitting and her laughter. But the small sound behind him, 2 quiet breaths, the rustle of small feet on the buffalo hide rug, made the emptiness less like a wound and more like a scar he might learn to live with. When the fire burned low, he spread an old blanket near the hearth. The older girl helped the younger lie down, then lay beside her, one arm draped protectively. Luke stood in the doorway watching. The coat, he'd given them now a cocoon around their small bodies. He thought about closing the door against the cold, then realized he already had. Outside, the wind eased to a whisper, carrying the smell of pine and distant snow. Luke leaned against the frame, eyes heavy. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone in his own house. He didn't know yet that by saving those 2 girls, he'd save himself from the silence that had been killing him one day at a time. The plains lay still again, but now 3 breaths rose inside that cabin instead of 1. And somewhere beyond the hills, a horse was already carrying a mother who would change the meaning of mercy forever. Snow thickens and the plains fall silent again. Inside Luke Mercer's lonely cabin, fire and fear breathed the same air. The rescued Apache girls watch every movement as trust flickers like flame. Luke tries to remember what warmth feels like, but ghosts linger in the corners. Each sound, the hiss of wood, the crack of ice on the roof, reminds him that peace can vanish as fast as a match in the wind. Yet somewhere between the hush of snowfall and the hush of sleep, a man and 2 children begin to belong to one another. The storm didn't roar that night. It whispered, thin, steady, relentless. Flakes slid down the chimney like ash. The cabin walls sighed under their weight. Luke sat by the fire, mending a broken strap. Across from him, the girls huddled close, faces glowing in the light. The younger, Winona, had fallen asleep curled in her sister's lap. The older one, Tala, stayed awake, dark eyes fixed on the flames. Every so often she'd glance at him, wary but curious, as though measuring how much a man he really was. He kept his voice low. "That's your sister, huh? Brave little thing." She didn't answer, but he caught the tiniest lift of her chin. Pride without words. He smiled faintly and went back to sewing. The thread hissed through leather, and the fire popped in time. It was the first rhythm his cabin had heard in months that wasn't the sound of loneliness. When the clock on the mantel ticked past midnight, he draped another blanket over them and stirred the coals. Outside, the world was all white breath and stillness. Inside, warmth held. Dawn came gray. Luke stepped outside, breath clouding in the cold. His world looked clean again. The storm had covered every scar. Snow lay smooth over the graves behind the corral, over the fence rails, over the empty water trough. He touched the top rail with his glove and felt the frostbite through the leather. Inside, the girls had woken. Winona knelt on the rug, tracing patterns in the ash with a stick. Tala sat straight back by the hearth, Luke's coat still wrapped around both of them like armor. She watched him come in, but didn't flinch. He nodded toward the fire. "Keep it fed. We'll need the heat." She tilted her head, catching only the tone. Then she fed a new log to the flames. The act felt like a promise. He cooked breakfast. Simple fare. Cornmeal mush, beans, a bit of salt pork. When he set the bowls down, Winona giggled softly at the puff of steam. Tala cut the sound short with a warning look. But Luke caught the ghost of a smile hiding in it. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "Both of you." They didn't answer, but the younger one reached for his sleeve again. That was answer enough. For 2 days the storm pinned them inside. Luke worked on small chores, patching boot soles, sharpening his knife, feeding the mare. The girls explored the single room, touching every corner as if to learn where the danger lived. By the second night, they claimed the rug near the fire as their own. Luke began leaving the lantern burning low, so they wouldn't wake to darkness. He talked to them more, not expecting replies, just to keep the quiet from swallowing the place again. "Used to be another voice here," he said once, eyes on the flames. She liked to sing while she cooked. Tala looked up. Something in his tone must have reached her. She nodded once, solemn. For the first time he felt understood, without words. On the third morning, the sky cleared. The snow outside blazed white, untouched. Luke saddled the horse and rode to check his traps. When he returned near dusk, thin smoke curled from the chimney. The door creaked open to warmth and he stopped, laughter. Winona was sitting on the floor, stacking bits of kindling into a crooked tower while Tala supervised. The sound was small but bright. Luke stood there a moment, letting it soak in. Then he closed the door behind him and stamped the snow from his boots. "Smells like you girls learned to burn beans same as me," he said. Tala's lips twitched. A spark of humor. Quick, shy. He'd take it. That night, he set another log on a fire and leaned back in his chair. The girls had fallen asleep early, wrapped in blankets. The room glowed amber and alive. Outside, the moon rose pale over the ridge. For the first time since his wife's passing, Luke Mercer didn't dread the sound of the wind. He watched the flames dance and thought of the cry that had brought him here, how it had broken his silence wide open. He didn't know what would come next, only that tomorrow's hoofbeats might carry something new on the air. He was ready for it. Out beyond the hills, a horse moved through the snow, steady, determined, carrying a woman wrapped in red and loss. By the time the smoke from Luke Mercer's chimney thinned, fate was already riding toward his door. Morning breaks gray and still until the sound of hoofbeats cuts the quiet wide open. From a ridge rides a woman wrapped in red wool in winter, hair braided with stray feathers, eyes the color of stormlight. She comes not as a stranger, but as a mother, drawn by the thin smoke of her daughter's survival. Gratitude lives in her gaze, yet something older rides with her, duty, loss, and the unspoken law that a life saved must be repaid. The frost hadn't melted yet when the first echo reached him. Hooves. Slow, deliberate, steady as a heartbeat on the frozen ground. Luke set down his coffee and stepped to the door, rifle resting against the frame. The light was weak, the kind that hides distance, but he could see her even before she reached the clearing. A single rider, horse dark against the snow, red blanket bright as blood in the pale day. The girls heard her too. Tala was already on her feet, eyes wide. Winona gave a shout, one of those clear, bell-like cries that can break a man open, and bolted past him into the cold. Luke followed slower, boots sinking deep. The woman swung down from her horse in one motion, dropping to her knees as the two children collided with her. Arms wrapped, voices tangled in quick Apache syllables. The sound was all gratitude and disbelief and tears that froze before they fell. Luke stopped a few paces back, hat in hand. He didn't want to break it. There was holiness in that kind of reunion. When she looked up, her eyes found him, sharp, measuring, bright with everything she hadn't said yet. She rose, snow clinging to the hem of her blanket. "I am Nia," she said, her English careful, shaped by thought. "They are mine. You saved them." He nodded once. "They were lost. Couldn't leave, Em." She hesitated, as if testing each word for weight. "A life saved must be repaid. My way, I come to you." It took him a beat to understand. "Ma'am, you don't owe me a thing." Her gaze didn't soften. "A home is not payment. It is peace." She stepped past him and into the cabin. The girls followed, their laughter quick and high again, the sound of something finding its place. Inside, Nia moved like someone who already knew what work to do. She laid a hand on each child's head, whispered something low in her own tongue, then turned to the hearth. The fire caught with one touch. Her motions were practiced, silent, sure. Luke stood in the doorway, unsure what to say. The space that had been his alone now felt larger, but fuller, as though the air itself had changed weight. "You can rest," he said quietly. "Eat first." She accepted a bowl without a word. When she tasted the beans, she closed her eyes once. Approval, maybe thanks. Her daughters watched her, copying her every motion. The small cabin that had been hollow since his wife's death filled with a hum of simple life. Spoons tapping, breath mixing with steam, the sigh of logs. That evening, while the wind pressed soft against the shutters, he caught her voice. She was humming, something low and round, older than the hills. The girls had fallen asleep, curled together on the rug. The tune wound around the firelight, settled deep in the cracks of the room. Luke listened from his chair, heart heavy and quiet. The sound reminded him of church songs sung too far from any church, the kind that made a man think about mercy and the price it asks. He looked at her then, really looked, at the worn braid falling over her shoulder, at the proud line of her face, at the hands that had already found a rhythm in his home. When she met his gaze, she didn't look away. Later, after the fire sank to coals, he stepped outside. The night smelled of pine and smoke. He could still hear the whisper of that song through the door, the rise and fall of it. He knew the West didn't hand out second chances. Yet somehow one had ridden to his doorstep, wrapped in red and winter and grace. He touched the rail, felt the rough grain under his palm, and whispered to the dark, "Thank you." By dawn, the world would know that Luke Mercer's cabin was no longer empty. And before another sunset, gratitude would become something neither debt nor fate, something far harder to let go. Some debts can't be counted in coin. When Nia speaks of repayment, she offers not gold or favor but herself, her place, her labor, her peace. Luke resists, pride tugging one way, loneliness the other. Yet in the hush of winter, small kindnesses gather weight. A mended shirt, a shared fire, a glance that lingers a heartbeat too long. What began as shelter becomes something closer to belonging, though the world beyond their door has sharp eyes and cruel tongues. Snow held the valley like a hand too gentle to trust. Each morning broke pale and slow, smoke rising from the chimney in a line so thin it seemed the sky might snap it. Inside the cabin, life had found rhythm again. The girls chased each other between chair and hearth, bare feet thumping the floorboards Luke had laid himself. Nia kept her work, quiet, sure, precise. She spoke little, but every gesture had purpose. When she swept the floor, the sound was soft enough to calm the restless in him. He told himself she'd stay only until the thaw, told himself that mercy was temporary. But winter doesn't care for the promises a man makes to keep his heart safe. One afternoon, he came in from the yard, hands raw from splitting wood. Nia was at the table, needle in hand, mending the rip in his old work shirt. The girls were asleep near the fire, breathing slow and even. "You don't have to do that," he said. She looked up once. It was torn. "I've worn worse. And looked worse." A faint smile touched her mouth, gone almost before he saw it. He laughed quietly, the sound startling in the small room. "Guess I can't argue that." She didn't reply, just kept stitching. The thread moved through cloth with a whisper like rain. When she tied the knot and bit the end clean, she handed the shirt across the table. "For tomorrow," she said. He took it, fingers brushing hers. The contact was brief, but the warmth stayed longer than it should have. The days folded into one another. He found her hums replaced the wind's loneliness. Her footsteps steadied the boards that used to creak from emptiness. She moved through the cabin like a woman, making peace with ghosts. He caught himself waiting for her voice in the mornings. When she wasn't near, the silence felt too wide. It unsettled him. Toward the end of the week, 2 riders from town appeared at the gate. Cooper and Hayes, men Luke had traded with before the snows. Their horses stood nervous in the drifts, snorting steam. "Afternoon," Luke said, keeping his tone even. "Afternoon," Hayes answered, eyes narrowing past him toward the cabin. "Heard tell you took in a squaw and her young uns." Luke's jaw tightened. "They got names." Cooper spat in the snow. "Names don't change what they are." Behind the frosted window, Nia's shadow moved. Slow, deliberate, unbowed. "You got business?" Luke asked. "Just advice." Hayes shifted in his saddle. "Folks talk. Might be best you send 'em on their way before trouble starts sniffing around." Luke folded his arms. "If trouble's riding my way, tell it to pack a coat." The men exchanged looks, muttered, and turned their horses downhill. Snow swallowed the sound of their hooves. When he went back inside, Nia was by the fire, spine straight. Tala's hand gripped hers tight. "They'll keep talking," he said. "Yes," she replied. "Words are wind. We build walls." Her calm steadied him better than whiskey ever had. That night, the cabin glowed like a lantern in the storm. Nia ground corn by the hearth, humming. Luke sat sharpening his knife, the rhythm matching hers. The girls whispered secrets in Apache beneath a blanket, their giggles rising like birdsong. He realized then he hadn't heard children laugh in his house since before the grave on the hill froze over. When she set a bowl of stew before him, he met her eyes. "You keep feeding me like this, I'll forget how to eat alone." "That would be good," she said simply. He tried to find words after that. None fit. Some feelings aren't meant for language. Later, after the girls slept, he found her at the window. Snow blew soft against the glass, tapping like restless fingers. "You mean to leave come spring?" he asked. She turned. Firelight traced her face, half gold, half shadow. "Do you wish me gone?" "No," he said too quickly. Then softer. "But I don't want you thinking you owe me this roof." She watched him a long moment, then stepped closer. "I told you, that is not why I stay. You gave my daughters back their breath. I give you my work, my peace, my hands." Her voice didn't waver. "It is not payment. It is life continuing." He felt his throat tighten. "You deserve more than this cabin." "Then make it more." The words landed like an arrow that found its mark. She moved past him, banking the fire before sleep. He stood there a while, listening to the soft rustle of her blanket, the steady breaths of the children, the whisper of snow outside. Sometime before dawn, he woke to the sound of quiet singing, Nia's voice low, melodic, threading through the dark. The language was not his, but the meaning didn't need translation. It spoke of endurance, of gratitude without ownership, of the thin space between sorrow and grace. He lay there, eyes open, watching the ceiling flicker with firelight. For the first time in years, his heart felt heavy and alive in the same breath. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft as mercy. Inside, a man and a woman learned the strange arithmetic of the West. How loneliness divided by kindness could add up to love. But spring would come soon, and with it, eyes from town, and tests neither of them had yet imagined. Peace never lasts on the frontier. It comes quiet, disguised as routine, until the world remembers you, and your happiness both owe it something. Luke Mercer and Nia have built a life of work and small laughter, but the valley keeps its gossip sharp. Two riders bring words that sting worse than frostbite, and Luke learns that protecting someone isn't the same as understanding them. Love, like winter fire, must be fed, tended, and believed in even when the wind turns cruel. The thaw came slow that year. Ice cracked in the creek with a sound like bones loosening after a long sleep. The smell of pine sap returned to the air, sweet and sharp. Luke took down the shutters, opened the windows, and let the cabin breathe. Inside, life moved easily now. The girls had grown stronger, their laughter filling corners that once knew only dust. Nia sang while she worked, low tunes that turned the hours gentle. Luke would find excuses to stay inside longer than chores required. He told himself he was fixing hinges or mending tack, but what he was really doing was listening. The sound of her voice did something to the air, made it softer, cleaner, as if sorrow itself had been brushed from a room. One morning he came in from the barn to find her standing over the table, a strand of her braid loose against her cheek. She was shaping dough, flour dusting her hands. The girls were on the floor near the hearth, arguing over a carved wooden horse. Luke stopped in the doorway. For a moment the sight hit him with quiet force. The light slanted through the window, touching her hair, the flower in the air, the curve of the children's smiles. It was nothing special, and everything he'd been missing. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "Guess I am." "Then eat before the bread cools." He laughed, that low, rough laugh that had been missing from him for years. But good news travels slow in these parts. Bad news gallops. By afternoon, two riders appeared again, different men this time, hard-eyed, stiff-backed. They reined up in front of the fence, faces pinched with judgment. Luke met them outside, coat unbuttoned, rifle still hanging by the door where they could see it. "Afternoon," he said. Luke, one of them, Ralph Jennings, nodded curtly. "We came talking on behalf of some of the town folk." "Talk then." The second man spat in the snow. "Word's gone. Round you got a squaw living under your roof." Luke's jaw set. "Her name's Nia." "Names don't wash the sin," Jennings muttered. "People say you're forgetting your wife's memory." The word struck him like a physical blow, but he didn't move. He saw Nia through the window, her face still, the girl's small heads bent to her side. "I remember my wife every sunrise," he said, "and I reckon she'd rather see this house full of life than dust." Jennings shifted in the saddle. "Town don't see it that way." "Then town can look elsewhere." The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Then the riders turned and left, snow crunching beneath hooves. Luke watched until they disappeared behind the ridge. When he went back inside, Nia was by the fire, spine straight, eyes calm. "They will keep talking," she said. He nodded. "They always do." She placed a hand lightly on his arm. "Peace isn't given. We make it." That night he couldn't sleep. The fire painted her face in soft gold as she whispered to her daughters. The word she kept repeating was safe. It threaded through him like prayer. He realized then that what he wanted wasn't just to protect her. He wanted to be part of whatever world she built with that word. A week later, wolves came down from the ridge again. Hunger drove them bold. Their howls woke the cabin in the blue dark before dawn. Luke was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Nia was already moving, shepherding the girls into the corner before grabbing her own bow from the wall. Tala fetched arrows, eyes fierce with the same fire her mother carried. Through the window he saw shapes pacing near the barn, shadows slipping between moonlight and snow. "Stay inside," he ordered. She shook her head. "You shoot. I keep them back." There was no time to argue. The first wolf lunged from the dark. His shot cracked the air, echoing down the valley. The animal dropped. The others hesitated at the smell of gunpowder. Nia stepped into the doorway, bow drawn. Her arrow flew straight and true, thudding into the ground before the lead wolf's nose. It yelped, turned, and the rest scattered into the trees. Silence fell again, broken only by the sound of breathing, hers, the horses in the barn. Luke lowered the rifle slowly. Snow drifted around them, lit silver by moonlight. He looked at her, hair loose from the braid, breath white against the cold. Something inside him steadied. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded once. "Together, yes." The words settled in the air like a promise. When they returned inside, the girls were already asleep again, clutching each other under blankets. Nia sat by the fire, unstringing her bow, and he crouched beside her. Their shoulders touched, warm against the cold draft creeping through cracks. "You can stay," he said quietly. "Not because you owe me, because I'd be a fool to let you go." For a heartbeat she didn't move. Then her hand found his, fingers tracing the calluses on his palm. "I stay," she said simply, "because this place breathes again." He closed his fingers over hers. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle, forgiving. The wind hummed through the eaves like an old tune rediscovered. The cabin was no longer four walls. It was home. By dawn, only the tracks of wolves marked the yard. But inside, something new had taken root. Quiet, strong, unspoken. The kind of love the frontier gives only once and never takes back without a fight. When the wolves fade into the hills, peace returns like a stranger testing the door. Dawn finds the cabin quiet, the fire low, a family half born from mercy and half from choice. But the West never lets love rest easy. It demands proof. As light climbs a ridge, Luke Mercer and Nia must decide whether their small peace will stay hidden in winter or stand in daylight, unashamed. The next morning isn't just new, it's theirs. Morning came soft, the kind that barely breaks the dark. Thin gold light spilled through the small window, touching the floorboards, the sleeping children, the rough weave of the blanket still warm from the night before. Luke was awake first. He sat on the edge of the bed, boots on the floor, elbows on his knees, watching the fire struggle with the last of the coals. His rifle leaned against the wall, still cold from the night's work. When he looked toward the hearth, Nia was there, her braid loose, eyes open but quiet. She had been watching him, too. Neither spoke at first. The hush was full enough. Then he said, "They won't come back. Not the wolves, not the men." She nodded, gaze steady. "Then we plant." He frowned lightly. "Plant. For spring. Beans, corn, peace." The faintest smile touched her lips. "It grows if you tend it." He exhaled, a breath half laugh, half release. "Then I reckon I'll learn a farm piece." The girls stirred, blinking sleep from their eyes. Winona reached for her sister's hand. Tala climbed to her knees and whispered something in Apache that Luke couldn't understand but somehow felt. He imagined it was safe. He went outside to fetch water. The air bit his lungs, but it felt clean. Smoke rose straight from the chimney. Even the sky looked closer, as if the storm had swept every doubt away. When he returned, Nia was already cooking. The smell of cornmeal filled the room. The girls sat by the table, brushing out each other's hair with a carved wooden comb. He paused in the doorway, taking it in. The warmth, the sound of their voices, the way Nia's sleeve brushed the pot as she stirred. He'd seen many mornings, but none that looked like this. After breakfast, he saddled his horse. The town still waited down the valley, full of its opinions. He meant to ride in for salt, nails, maybe a coil of rope. But mostly, he meant to be seen man, woman, children. A family. Nia came to the porch, shawl tied around her shoulders. "You ride today?" she asked. He nodded. "They need to know I don't hide." She studied him for a long moment, then stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest. "Then ride slow. Let them look." Her touch lingered. "And come back." He caught her hand, rough palm against rough palm. "Always." The girls waved from the doorway, faces bright against the dim light inside. He rode down the trail, snow crunching under hooves, the cabin shrinking behind him. When he glanced back, smoke still rose, thin and straight, like a promise sent skyward. Rockville was quiet that morning. The thaw had turned the streets to slush. A few men lifted their heads as he passed. Mrs. Whitaker, standing on the porch of the store, froze mid-sweep of her broom. Luke tipped his hat. She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. That was all the permission the valley would ever give, and it was enough. He bought what he needed, paid in silver, and rode home before noon. By the time he crested the ridge, the sun was high, and the snow on the roof of the cabin glittered like fresh tin. Nia was outside, hanging wash linens on a line, the girls chasing each other through the drifts. The sight filled him with a stillness deeper than joy. He dismounted, watching her hands move, sure graceful, as if every motion spoke the same quiet language. We made it. That evening, as the sun bled orange behind the pines, they sat on the porch. The children were asleep inside. The air smelled of pine pitch and cooling earth. "You think they'll forget?" he asked. "No," she said, "but they'll grow tired of remembering." He chuckled softly. "Good enough." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was a kind that settles after a storm, the quiet of things finding their rightful place. When she leaned her head against his shoulder, he didn't move. The warmth between them was steady, real. Later, when the moon rose and the wind slid through the trees, Luke closed his eyes and listened. The world was still, but not empty. Inside the cabin, the fire whispered low. The children's breaths mingled with the night, and somewhere deeper than memory, Nia began to hum her old tune again. It carried into the cold air, weaving through pine and snow, until it sounded less like a song and more like the land itself remembering. Luke smiled, eyes half closed. "That's a good sound," he murmured. Nia's hand found his. "It's home," she said, and for the first time in a long, hard life, he knew she was right. They say the plains remember every kindness, that when the wind moves just right, it hums a song of those who built peace out of nothing but hunger and hope. Out here, folks still speak of the cowboy who saved 2 Apache girls and found his heart waiting in the snow beside them. And if you ever ride that valley when the frost breaks, listen close. You might hear the tune she left behind.